Okay, I think, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Committee of the Whole for January 18th already. Council, we have an agenda in front of us, and we'd be great if one of our members would mute his or her computer. So, Council, any amendments or adjustments to the agenda or declarations of conflict? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Second, Councillor Toth. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. 3 items on our agenda, and so we'll get right into it. By the way, this is, the question was asked earlier, Committee of the Whole is meant to be a process where we can delve into topics perhaps in a little more detail, a little more to get a better understanding of topics for all of us on council. So Committee of the Whole then makes recommendations to council, who then entertain them as a matter of formality, or a formal matter with resolutions directing staff and other decisions of the district. So with that preamble, we'll jump into the exciting topic of reclaimed water. And I guess, Mr. Dillon, are you going to lead us to start with? And then perhaps there are other people here to help.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a one-page or two-page report that basically outlines the reclaimed water feasibility study for receipt and review by council. We don't have a presentation at this time. We did provide a link to council on a previous presentation that a consultant provided. So we're here for the discussion purposes, and I have Megan Lee, who's our manager of development engineering and sustainability, who worked closely with the consultant on that reclaimed water feasibility study, available here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. All right. So, council, I know you've had a chance to read this in comprehensive detail. Any questions or maybe not, everybody's eyes are down, so I'll start. So what has happened, what has happened in the last year? This was, I think this report's dated March of 2022. Presumably, therefore, it was mostly done in 2021. It is part of our strategic plan. I know the current strategic plan that reclaimed water be studied in depth in the current term of the strategic plan. So I guess, can maybe Mr. Dillon, is there anything you can add, like what has been done in the last year, I suppose, almost year, on this matter, and I'm asking in the context of council in particular. As council, did they have any subsequent recommendations, for example?
So I'll answer the first part through the chair, and then I'll defer to manager of sustainability and development engineering on just to go through the timeline of how the whole reclaimed feasibility study happened, what we did in terms of public engagement. So it was presented to council, I believe, in May of last year. Not sure of the exact date, but it was in that YouTube link that I shared with council. And it was just the consultant presenting the various options, and out of that presentation, no clear front runner emerged to pursue on a go-forward basis. They all had their own risks, and they all had high capital costs, and there were question marks around some of them. One of the popular solutions was to use reclaimed water to supplement the environmental flow needs on the Chapman system, but there's certain, there would be a regulatory process to go through for that, and there were questions around the level of treatment that happens in terms of, pharmaceuticals in the water and whether that would be appropriate to discharge, as well as the very high capital costs. I will defer to Ms. Lee on a more broad outline of how what were the drivers behind the reclaimed water feasibility study, what they looked at, and what came out of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Ms. Lee?
Okay.
Angle it down.
Thank you for the question. So we went through a long series of options and distilled them down into, I believe, 7 final options to be looked at in more depth. The most feasible option that came out of that was potentially to recharge the Seashell Marsh. And this would be supplementing kind of the environmental flow of the marsh, and the benefit to the community would be offsetting an upgrade to the outfall. There was still a significant capital cost, as well as the operating cost to going with that option, as well as somewhat of an unknown treatment, water polishing that would be required, and that would be defining that was outside the scope of the study. But it would have to be determined that there was, a community benefit to doing that, because there was a significant capital cost ongoing, and we would have to commit to doing that in perpetuity if we were offsetting the outfall. So we didn't proceed at that time in pursuing it further. Some of the other options, as was mentioned, was the Chapman Creek environmental flow need augmentation. And as was stated, there was a significant capital cost to that option, as well as a number of risks, approvals and permitting that would have to be better defined before we could even understand if that was possible. So the STRD was actually involved in the development of that option, and they are aware of it when they weigh out looking at the cost and the benefit analysis of defining other sources and reservoirs. So they are aware of that, and that is in their list of materials that they're going through for their water source planning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Shepherd, and then Councillor Shepherd. No, I just
ding dong. Just a question to what you mentioned on the SCRD. I'm guessing that the option they would like the town to pursue is the resupply of water into Chapman Creek. Is that not right?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So they, weighing the cost of doing that option, as well as the challenges and the timeline in being able to be approved to do that type of augmentation with reclaimed water, it wasn't in their interest at the time to pursue it any further, is my understanding.
Okay. Is that okay? You follow? Yep. Councillor Bell.
To the councillor. So just for clarification, a little bit of history in terms of how this is coming about, and I'm assuming that in some of the reading that it certainly is another option as we were, facing drought situations, that kind of thing. And just for where today is just to review the documents and then just to ask questions, and where might this go? Is this going into the budget as a partial initiative? Just kind of want to understand what's needed today.
Okay, I think it's not in the budget at this point.
Okay.
Correct me, everybody, but it's before us because I believe it was presented to Committee of the Whole in May or something, and Council didn't actually provide any formal direction or guidance on next steps.
Okay.
I'll add personally, the volume of water is a lot. We've heard, I think, in a previous meeting about the costs of expanding our outfall, where everything goes at present, is a huge number.
Yeah.
So we do face some decisions potentially imminently if we have to increase the capacity of the outfall. We have one of those, do we do A or do we do B?
Okay.
But at this point, I don't think we're quite there. The outfall, we'll be confirming hopefully in a budget to do some maintenance and small upgrades to the outfall. But longer term, we've got to put our wastewater somewhere.
Okay, good. That's helpful.
Councillor Inkster.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if in fact, and we've talked about the outfall over the last
number of years that eventually there would have to be a change to that pipe. If I was to say the outfall has to be in diameter larger, or has to, if it has to be in diameter larger based on our volume, or does it have to be an extension? Just some clarity on the issue, because if it's an extension of the outfall, and if it is in fact that rather than a larger diameter based on our volume, then there would have to be a rationale for an extension away from the shoreline. And if that extension is that the Vancouver Coastal Health, let's say, would be part of that decision-making process, I'm assuming that if they would ask for an extension, then they would have some requests or concerns about why they want an extension, i.e. contaminants, I'm assuming. Otherwise, there would be no extension. It would continue as is, and it would be not a concern over contaminants. So if, in fact, we go backwards from that to look at other options, that would be still the concern. So I'm wondering why there's an extension request, what exactly that's for. Is it volume or contaminants, and through you to staff? And if, in fact, it's the other issues of a health issue, that obviously you extend outfall from sewer systems,
To get it, yes.
right? Then the other options may then be a concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first one is that it's an old outfall, so if we need to, we need to replace, repair it or potentially replace it in place. But if we were going to do that, we would presumably want to anticipate for many years forward. Because I think I'm right, and this goes back to many years ago, it's at least, then it was at least a $5 million thing to replace the outfall in 2013 dollars or something. So we're talking a big number if we have to. I don't think, and I stand to be corrected, Mr. Dillon or Ms. Lee, I don't think it relates to contaminants, because what we produce is clean enough to go in the ocean as it is. But I stand.
Yeah, and we've spoken to that over the last little while, that with the assumption with the technology utilized and the expense of the plant, that the water coming out should be of a fairly close to water going in variety. But that's just my question. If in fact it is some of those other issues, then it makes the decision-making tree on the other end more difficult, more challenging. So if I could ask through to staff what their thoughts are, if they've studied why the outfall, because if we have an outfall cost into the ocean that's quite expensive, the assumption then would be that the land-based portion would also have an expense to it, because it's the same pipe.
No, it's a different pipe, depending on, if we were to put it in the marsh, it would be we wouldn't use the outfall to the same extent. So I think I'm right that putting it into the marsh would allow us to use the current outfall less, which hopefully would extend the life of the outfall. I'm looking for nods or help here.
But I was asking through you because I was trying to see if it was environmental standards or a volume issue.
I believe it's substantially the volume, because what we can produce from the Water Resource Center is cleaner in many respects than the ocean. Please, Mr. Dillon, thank you.
If I may, through the chair, Ms. Lee has been working closely with the manager of wastewater, and we've hired a consultant to recently do an inspection of the outfall and provide recommendations. So I believe she would have a lot of context on this question, which she can add to this discussion.
Great.
Yes, thank you. So currently this year, we're undertaking a project to reballast the existing outfall. And one of those options would actually be to replace a significant portion of that pipe, just because it's cheaper than adding weight, but we're still going through that analysis at this time. So we are doing some work to extend the life of the outfall at this time. That doesn't increase the hydraulic capacity, meaning the diameter of the pipe, and it doesn't increase the length. If we were to put more flow in that pipe than our municipal wastewater regulation permit currently allows, we would have to go through another environmental impact assessment to determine both the diameter of pipe that we could put in there for our hydraulic needs, as well as the distance further out it would have to go. So some of that is to do with the contaminant loading, and so both that's, when we're talking about the permit, our permit right now is for 10 for the sediment and 10 for the biological oxygen demand. But of course, that also links to the actual volume that's coming out. So even at, there's a possibility that once it's evaluated by the regulator, even if it is good quality, it still may need to be extended. We don't know that until we go through that process. So, but it is tied to the water quality, certainly.
Okay, it's a big number.
Yes, so it's a long process with the regulator to determine that, including a lot of this additional environmental assessment. And since the previous, we did do an environmental impact assessment at the time of the WRC design, but regulations change and they're asking for more things at this time, so it would have to be updated likely significantly if we wanted to increase the hydraulic capacity of that outfall. And so something that we are going to be determining through our sewer model, which has started this year, is to try to get a more accurate timeline as to when we would need to upgrade the hydraulic capacity of that outfall. So that would answer some of these questions in terms of when we would need to start either budgeting for that or looking at the alternative environmental option of putting it in the marsh, for example.
For example, yes. Has anybody talked to the marsh folks about this idea? Okay, we'll leave that as a hanging item.
I just, through the chair, want to add another piece to this, because this is a multi-dimensional puzzle in terms of wastewater. And so we have had issues with the filters at the wastewater treatment plant getting prematurely plugged. So the backwash from the filters that recycles through the process has negative effects on the effluent quality. And the accumulations also affect the efficient operation of the filters, leading to premature plugging and increased maintenance. So, so this has been an issue, and sometimes we've had to bypass the filters to achieve effluent quality. And so what we've been able to observe is even with the filters not online, our water quality has been very good. If it's exceeded that 10-10 criteria, it's been nominally exceeded, like 12 as opposed to 10, which in the grand scheme of things is not much of an exceedance when most wastewater treatment plants are operating to 40-40, which is a much lower level of treatment. So I think at some point we'll have to come back to council and outline what the strategy would be going forward. And part of that would be to amend to a 25-25 regulation, which doesn't mean we don't produce reclaimed water. We could still have that capacity to do that, but we're covered in a way that if we do have to bypass at times and we nominally exceed, we don't have to report those to the provinces because technically they're not exceedances of standards. So it's just a difference in how we report and how that gets tracked. So that, if you want to jump on the end of my explanation, Ms. Lee,
I think that's fine. That's a very different conversation, which gets into a whole lot of details that are beyond the scope today.
Okay, so yeah, we can come back to council later with that information.
Yeah. Councillor Bell, please.
To the chair. So these, at this point, are the recommendations as of today. Is that correct?
From the consultant's report has identified them. But I don't think council ever adopted any particular ones. I think this is pending.
These are the recommendations that still exist today, then, basically, and there's no additions at this point. So, so it looks like each one of them have their challenges, and the question that I'm wondering, pardon me, I don't know this area very well, but when you mean the Sechelt Marsh and tributary recharge, what does that mean?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. One of the options available is environmental recharge. So whether you're talking about Chapman Creek or the Sechelt Marsh, one of the options for reclaimed water is to provide an environmental benefit to the receiving environment. So what that really means is the Sechelt Marsh potentially doesn't have very high water quality. if we were to add the reclaimed water, we could give it environmental value. So if you elect to use one of these environmental recharge options, that is the only option type where the municipal wastewater regulator will consider lessening your outfall requirement. So if you used it for industry, for example, you would still have to have an outfall sufficient to take the total outflow, whether you used it or not. So only when you discharge it to the environment are you able to reduce your outfall requirement. So that's why this becomes an option. A lot of environmental study would need to be done to actually prove out that there is an environmental benefit to doing that, whether you did the Seashell Marsh or the Chapman Creek option. The Chapman Creek option would be, I think, substantially more onerous to prove out than the Marsh, but both would require buy-in from DFO, for example, and the the ministry and everything else, as well as engagement with First Nations and those types of things before you could actually explore that option.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Great.
I never knew there was so much. This is very in-depth. I'm very impressed.
Very, very complex.
Very complex. Thank you.
Great. Councillor McLaughlin, please.
Yeah, through the chair. I'm wondering if there are any seasonal aspects to the discharge, if they're high in the spring. I'm concerned at times, especially at the marsh when we have high tides. Will this augment some of the problems we have? Because I noticed, walking there a couple of weeks ago, we had a high tide and a lot of the path areas are quite washed out. I've never seen it in such bad shape.
In the marsh?
Yes, in the marsh. So I'm just wondering, in the reality of our situation, not just the consultant's report, what's our feedback on that?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So that was something that did come up during the evaluation of the options, was looking at the seasonal tides in the inlet. And I understand there is a weir at the outlet to hold the water back in the marsh and kind of control the flow there. So a little bit of hydraulic modeling would be necessary to understand exactly what that would do to the high levels in the marsh, through the rain season in November all the way through the winter. So that's something that would have to get proven out prior to going with that option. That would be part of the next piece of analysis if we wanted to go down the road of option one. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Shepherd.
I'm just wondering, obviously, we don't have to accept or make any kind of move on any of these options yet, but if perhaps when we get more information on the study you were mentioning, that we add to this matrix of the four options, compare it to the cost of just updating the outflow pipe and see all of them together.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was, as I say, that was the driver in 2012 or 13, that anything we could do to avoid extending the outfall and not spending $5 million in those dollars was worth pursuing. And I think it still applies.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If I could jump in with one last question about the outflow volumes. Wasn't there an exceptional volume during the atmospheric rains of November 2021 where it almost hit capacity?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep, through the chair. That was 4,900 cubic meters. So it was above our regulated discharge of 4,750 cubic meters. So yeah, it was an exceptionally high discharge. Haven't seen anything come close to that in recent memory, even with the rains we got recently. So that was an anomaly for sure. Thanks.
Yeah. And that's why we're working on the influent and the maintenance holes and stuff to hopefully mitigate that, because that's only happens in the heavy rains. Yeah, so far. Okay. So, Council, I think this is before us for a bit of orientation for some and an update. And the folks that were here last year, anything else you want to add? No? Oh, Councillor Rowe.
Nothing really to add, just some context that strategically it was, if I recall, we wanted to look at the possibility and what the potential options were and what the potential costs were. And that's why the report ended there. I would suggest through the chair, in my mind, that this is something we think about in our strategic planning, whether reclaimed water, any of the options are somewhere that we want to go. So that's it. That's all I had to say.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Toff.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I like the idea of the Seashell Marsh recharge if we can do anything to enhance the environment there. The Chapman Creek recharge does offer a lot of potential if but. There is a lot of complexity there. I think this is a document that's going to be really important if we're still proceeding down the liquid waste management plan update. This is going to have to feed into that. Regardless of whether we look at any of these options or option E or F, I think we're going to have to make sure the community is along for that conversation.
Yep. Fully agree with all of that. It's a lot of volume. You were asking about volume, Councillor Inkster. 2,000 cubic meters, and I think in the low point this summer, the whole of the Chapman Regional Water System is using 8,000 cubic meters. So this is a lot of water. And if we can, please.
The marsh idea is an interesting one because there's some natural features there that would deal with. It's an interesting experiment in how natural features deal with any kind of contaminants. The original argument being that the fresh water that comes out of the sewage treatment plant has near to the amount that kind of goes in. That's the argument that's been presented quite regularly. But it's another opportunity for the water to go through those natural filters that the environment has created for itself. So there's that piece to the idea. The flow issue of recharge, we do have to, we need the community involved, but what we also need is the Marsh Society involved in that particular discussion very heavily, because sometimes man gets involved in natural environmental ideas and we kind of screw it up. So that we know, anybody that lives in the downtown area or has lived in Seashell or seen the history of Seashell knows that that's one of the natural water distributors from the downtown area before we came in and started putting culverts in. So there's a lot of ideas around it, but it may be an option if we're clear that and it might have to be seasonal. It might have to be the summer. It might have to be the summertime that only the water can go in, because at this time of year, the paths.
Well, this is part of is part of the complexity. If we only put it in one place for part of the year, what do we do with it the rest of the year?
Yeah, well, that's other costs.
Yeah. So, Councillor Bell is right. Very complex. Okay, Council. So I think we'll take it as Councillor McLaughlin. Thanks.
To the chair, if I could just comment. I think a lot of residents, we realize we put in quite a bit of effort and money to create this reclaimed water, and they would like to see some kind of personal way to use it and appreciate it. So I think there is that element in the community, whether it's for their gardens or fields or whatever, even if it's a small amount of the water, I think they would appreciate some kind of gesture back to them about the whole idea behind it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Terrific. Yeah. Okay. I think Council will just motion to receive, I guess, procedurally, a motion to receive the report. Seconded. All in favor of receipt? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next opportunity for creativity and challenges are the building in which we're holding this meeting is getting a little older, like all of us. I believe it's about 36 years old, and we have a complex. I can't count, can I? No. Not me. That's what we have calculators for. So we have a very couple of detailed reports in front of us, and the same thing. I think we'll How about just entertain questions again, I think, am I correct, folks? You're looking, yes, we can assume that.
I can give a brief preamble.
Brief would be great.
So we commissioned these two studies last year. The first one presented options for the space limitations we're having at Municipal Hall with all the staff we've hired, and looked at various options. And then the second report is a detailed envelope condition assessment of Julie Mares, who was the project engineer, or the engineering project manager, sorry, for those two studies. So she has the detailed knowledge. If you have questions, she can answer some of them, but they're here and we're presenting them. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Councillor Shepherd.
Quick question to that. So the previous council embarked on a multi-year program. It's a $3 million program on the building, correct?
Embarked? No.
I thought we were in the process of no?
No.
All right.
It's part of a potential budget consideration for this year, but, right? Yeah, good.
All right. My mistake.
Yeah.
So it's a $3 million?
Yes.
Retrofit. Do we have a sense of how long that will extend the life of the building?
Ms. Maris, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Through the chair, that is a great question. That is a question I can bring back to the consultants. They didn't identify that in the report, but something I could bring back to them and get you a good explanation on that timeline.
Great.
Welcome.
Councillor Inkster.
How'd you see my hand there?
Peripheral vision.
Do I cast a shadow?
Yeah.
So we know that the building is not in the 30s. We know it's in the
26.
26, yeah, because it was an election issue in 96. If you were in favor of the building, the theory is you were no longer on council, because that wasn't the referendum decision. Anyway, I thought they built I was thinking and hoping, and maybe it's in here and there's more detail, is I thought we were trying to build 50-year buildings. Right?
Yep.
So this is 25.
And I don't think there's any structural issues.
Yeah.
The issue is every home needs regular maintenance. So some of what's recommended is in that category.
Yeah.
And then we get into the other discussion of, do we need more space? So I think, would that be fair, Ms. Mares?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I think one of the pieces that you're missing is it's also the maintenance of the building, but the era when it was built in the 90s, the type of system for building envelopes was called a concealed barrier, which means the cladding was directly attached to the sheathing. Nowadays, we put what's called a rain stream assembly, so it allows the water to drain behind the siding. So in this case, the building is now relying on the siding and the caulking and the windows and all of those details that are failing. And some of the windows in the 90s are seeing failure like this quite frequently in Vancouver. So this is not an uncommon thing that we're seeing. You'll see at the corner of the windows, the miter joints, the corner details are starting to fall apart. And you'll start seeing the black extend up through the window. So those are some of the common features you see. So it's not just maintenance, but it's just the material and the era of that time.
Great, thanks. Yes, Councillor Bell, thanks.
Through the chair. Now, please don't be offended if I ask this question, and I hope I don't offend any of the public, but do we need the tower? And I mean, I look at it and I said, you know, in there's $13,000 just that I can see that's part of that, and then there could be other costs that are in the list, and I'm just curious as to see, is it a structural thing? But I just like to ask the question.
No, we don't need the tower.
Through the chair, I was going to echo the statement, but yeah, no, it's a subjective thing, and I've heard more case for why we shouldn't have the tower than to keep the tower. just anecdotally. So I would agree with that assessment. Thanks.
No was quicker. Great, thanks.
So,
Councillor Inkster.
yeah, thank you. So thanks for the information on the building, what's happening, because we know what happens with water and freezing and thawing, what it's doing to our roads, as an example. So is it a situation where the back end of the building is where the issues are? I'm just asking questions. And is there also an issue with the parts of the building that are surrounded and or in behind the trees and that we put up? So it's all about wetness and the inability of our building to dry out properly is what I'm wondering. Yeah. Because as we move forward and make these changes, perhaps we need to look at some of those issues with our building in terms of trees in front and maybe cut it back and stuff like that, just so the sun can deal with that. Thanks.
Great. Sir.
Thank you. To the chair, I'll just add to that. So what we're looking for is actually a phasing plan. So we're looking at severity levels. So the library wall is the worst wall, then the east wall, then the tower, and then the back wall, and then towards the staff parking is the final wall. So we're not looking at doing it all at once, knowing that it's a huge cost increase. We're looking at repairing what's the highest priority, and the report kind of outlines that, where we're seeing damage inside the library, and it's getting to a point where we have to make it safe for people using the library. We don't want mold and water and further damage, because then we will have structural damage if we don't do anything about it.
Right. Great, thank you. Councillor Toth.
Thank you. Sorry. Just in the conversation that we had during the budget presentations, the conversation was sort of around multiple phases, about $3 million in total. But what we're seeing in this report is more like $1.6, $1.7 million. So I'm just curious about the discrepancy, if that's because we're phasing it, we're expecting more cost escalation over time, or is there work that's being contemplated that's not part of this report?
Great, good question. Who wants to grab it? Ms. Mercer?
Thanks for the question, through the chair. It doesn't include the engineering fees and some of the contingencies and the updated cost of living on the coast and the fees associated with doing work over here. So the revised costs that were in the budget are more realistic and updated based on that, as well as tying into the phasing plan.
So all of those account for the difference between the 1.6 and 3? Wow. Okay. We're still on the topic, but there's the facility needs assessment. Wasn't sure if council had questions about that, which is to start on page 160 of our agenda package. Yeah. Yep. Mr. Dillon?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chair. One thing when we presented that, the needs assessment is there was no clear consensus from council on which one of those options we should go forward. And I think that's an important conversation, because if we are to phase out the building envelope reconstruction over 5 years, if we pursue one of the options that was presented in the Cornerstone report, the building envelope repairs would be rolled into one of those options. So that would, obviously you're not going to repair the envelope on a wall of your building if you're going to rebuild that wall to make your building bigger, right? So that's an important aspect that perhaps council wants to deliberate over. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, to discuss a budget of whatever number for repairs and then decide next week we're going to do something completely new, or we need to, it's kind of backwards. We probably need to look at this assessment to report first. My observation. Just wondering if Councillor McLaughlin was going to put...
Got the light on.
he leaves his light on.
I went to the finals of the Reach for the Top.
Where Councillor Inkster, you had a question. Don't make me ask you a question.
So in these discussions of major potential expense, one of the things that I always wonder about is with our borrowing capacity and when we, because this is one of our major buildings, whether the community is happy with its location and construction or not. It's a building that's well used and the library's in it, because that was the impetus, the referendum that built the library. So I'm just wondering if that could be a further discussion with finances to, because I'd like to look at something over time. I'm frankly tired of 7 to 10% tax increases. So, you know, if we could talk about that bigger picture thing, and then we put a plan in place that takes into account the dovetailing of the down draw on our other debts, which have come down quite substantially in the last 5 years. Thank goodness. So that would be a discussion I'd be happy to have.
Great, thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. This is very informative, very interesting. And my background is a bit in facilities planning as my years went on, and architecture and planning. And I did some work with the City of Calgary where they felt, 10, 15 years ago, yikes, what are we going to do? We need another city hall. We're growing. And I just want to bring what I learned from there about facility utilization. And they were early on with this idea of hoteling and people working from home. And they used that as a kind of a study, a case study, and they really, really adopted it. They embraced it. And I'm sure all of us during COVID, whether we liked it or not, we ended up embracing that. And so we found that, maybe some of the questions in this report are not thinking outside the box that way. Like the questions maybe should be, should we do a total space utilization of all of our facilities? Maybe try and share some spaces with the school board and other jurisdictions with the RD, and just think outside the box a little bit. And my forte with schools was right-sizing schools, saying who's really there, how are they using it, and what size should that facility be? Because we can't just keep adding and updating everything. It'd be nice if we could, but I think those days are past. And we're just a little municipality, unfortunately. I'm sure we can't do all the things we'd like to, so that might help us prioritize. And there might be something actually that can transform the way we work, which is the way we're all having to, I think, anyway. And the staff may be quite supportive of it. Usually they are. They want to work from home a lot more than they used to, and once they got a taste for it.
So I hear your comment that maybe the next iteration of this assessments could be broader and contemplate.
Take that into account, a little more of that utilization and options.
Great.
Over here.
No, we're ignoring you. Who wants to go first?
Oh, no, I didn't know you had your hand.
The chair recognizes Councillor Bell.
Thank you. To the chair, okay. Getting back to my question earlier about the tower, I don't want to be facetious or anything about this, but it's in the costs in terms of a priority. Could it be looked at now as terms of taking it out, if it is? And what would that look like in terms of costs, whether it's adding cost or taking away cost? I'd like to have that looked at in this budget, if that's
And you were talking about the tower?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. I think we can go and have a look at that sometime. Great. That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, phase 2 is the tower portion. Staff have considered looking at maybe getting a rendering of what it would look like to have that tower removed or brought down, and include that as part of the next steps. So we can look at that with the cost associated. You're welcome. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Shepherd, thank you for your patience.
Just to follow up to Councillor McLaughlin's comment about efficiencies, and perhaps staff could come back later with a comment on, having gone through COVID, are there efficiencies in space utilization that they've seen that they want to continue with, which would change some of the results of the facility manager report? Thank you.
Yeah, great. Good. Just half a second. Mr. Douglas, was that part of, were you wanting to respond to Councillor Shepherd?
Yes. On page 203 of the agenda, there's two paragraphs about workplace modernization, and the consultant figured we could save between 10 and 25% if we looked at alternative methods for working with staff, meaning at home.
Yeah. Great. Councillor Toth.
David just took the words out of my mouth. That's the question I had.
Page 203.
Thought I saw it
Perfect.
in the report.
I was going to comment on that too, that the regional district was actually looking at space constraint issues in the lead up to COVID. And, you know, the possibility of even putting trailers in the parking lot, like it was becoming quite an acute issue up there. And with the changes to more work from home and flexible work schedules, all of that has been canceled, basically. They've been able to utilize the space they have to accommodate the future needs for the immediate. But, you know, I just wanted to comment that, you know, the tower is lovely, looks great in the photos for the tourists, but, yeah, it's never really been functional. And when you look at yes, useless, as our gallery says. When you look at, you know, the overview diagram of Municipal Hall that's on page 176, there's a lot of opportunities to square out this building. You know, and when we look at, do we take the tower down? Do we build in that footprint usable office space instead? It's just, you know, it seems there's no point in taking the building down and closing it in and building new whatevers if we've got an opportunity to actually include a little bit of additional space while we've got crews mobilized on site. So just my own thoughts. Thanks.
While we have
crews on site doing, you know, demolition and reconstruction work of the facade and, you know, whatever. Right?
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Shepherd, then Councillor Inkster.
Following up on that point, now I've forgotten my point about it though.
All right. Yeah. Would you like a moment?
Yeah. It was to ask our senior councillors here. I was pointing at Councillor Toth. If there had been, these reports came, I think it was late in council, in the last council, was the last council preferring one option or the other, or it was too sort of no decision was made, or there was no sense of. Thank you.
My recollection is that we received it and there were questions and there was no specific direction to investigate further down any particular path. I don't know that there's enough information in these reports for us as a council to make any sort of direction, but.
Yeah, and that's probably a good lead into what comes out of this discussion is probably us going away and thinking a bit about it. There's one or two things that have been identified, but then probably staff can come back with a specific proposal on how to proceed, recognizing the comments that we made. Yeah, if that suits. Okay, Mr. Dillon, please.
Yes, through the chair. Just so the matter started from the building envelope reconstruction. So the phasing we've chosen is, and feel free to jump in, Ms. Maris, is that we chose for the year one was the wall that we knew, like under any option, we wouldn't be touching. So doing year one would not impact those long-term plans unless the plan is to, you know, go with a totally new building. But that was the approach. Is that correct, Ms. Maris? So the year one would be the wall that we would know that we would absolutely not be able to touch because of building constraints or the way the lot is shaped. And perhaps Ms. Maris can go through that rationale, but that's the way we approached it. Thank you.
Okay, so essentially you're saying you picked the most urgent first.
The most urgent, but the one that we would know we wouldn't even be touching in the future based on the options that we had.
If we did any of the senior councillors' recommended comments. Oh, that might stick. Anything to add, Ms. Maris?
Through the chair, yes, so the last phase, which is phase 5, which we have is about 268,000, would be the back corner of the building, which is where we, as a group, thought would be the best place for the addition of the building. So it's the least damaged wall. So it gives us time to kind of organize and plan around that. And phase 2 is the tower, so it also gives us time while we're doing phase 1 to think about what we want to do with phase 2. So there was some strategy around thinking of some of those ideas that Councillor Toth had talked about, and phasing it out so we have time, but also addressing the immediate concerns so we don't have any more damage or concerns with safety and health.
Great. Okay, council, should we take that as read for now and your light's on? Does that mean your hand's up?
Yeah, you recognized me earlier.
I did.
You forgot you.
I did.
You've been sitting too close to Councillor.
Councillor Inkster.
Yeah.
Another senior councillor.
Yes. Yes, thank you. It'll be interesting to see if, in fact, because a couple of councillors have mentioned that the tower and what the analysis of the takedown of a portion of that is. Because that's taking down the top part and then capping it. That's what you have to do. Consider that it's a stairwell. People know that, I'm assuming. So you have an elevator at one end and a stairwell at the other, so no fire egress on this end. So we have to keep the tower, probably.
You have to keep the stairwell.
The stairwell.
I think the question is above the second floor.
Yeah, exactly, but that's the tower. It's, I think 2/3 of the tower is stairwell to the second floor. So anyway, that was a big consideration in the original plan. And in terms of the workplace utilization of our staff and our finance director mentioning that there's a change in staff usage, extrapolate the numbers of people we've hired the last 3 years over the next 5 years. Even if we have a 10 to 20% change in usage of the office, we will probably hire that many people to need that space that's not being utilized. So we need a long-term thought processes on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to also remind everyone about the potential for climate change and sea rise, that we are sitting basically at ground level zero, as we were pointed out. We went to the RCMP courthouse building, which is lovely. But also that this report said that for the City of Toronto, they found that they had a 33% savings. And also that in this report, they didn't consider some of our other facilities like Seaside Center, Rockwood, et cetera, that Op Center as well, that could have space that could also be shared if it's properly organized with cell phones and all the things we do, and and having more commuted meetings and Zoom meetings and such. I think that's kind of the way to go.
So that's an additional part of the creativity and out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Okay, council, is that enough for today on this topic? Motion to receive, and I'm sure staff have seconded. All in favor? I'm sure staff has more than enough to work with. Great. All right, we'll go to Cowrie Street, and by way of preamble, I think we've got a short staff report, and I think this grows out of some comments that some of us have had from the community, from the business community, to a certain degree, the Downtown Business Association, just wanting to keep this on our radar. So, it's the same thing. It's more to make sure we've got some things to think about. It's, throw some ideas around in 5 or 10 minutes at the most, he said, hinting. So, lots of drawings from, I believe this is 2012 and 2013. Councillor Toth, I think there was some further discussion more recently. Put you on the spot.
Well, I don't know that there was further discussion per se, but near the beginning of last term, I think a couple of us kicked around conversation about this sort of an idea. And I think one of the things that the contemplation from 2012, 2013 didn't take into account was whether that was the correct direction of flow for traffic. I didn't look back at any meeting minutes or anything like that this came out of, but you know, it was highlighted that one of the big impacts would be to transit with any of these particular options that were part of this original report. And, you know, you mitigate that. You run the one-way stretch the other way. It's the direction of transit flow. There are, you know, 3 blocks, but there's probably 500 different options on how those 3 blocks could be configured. Yeah, so it's just, but that was my own thoughts and contemplations from it. You know, I've sketched it out. I've talked to a few people, but it's never been we've had higher priority things to worry about.
I agree.
So,
yeah. And that's why it's here for us to have on our radar, a little benefit from history. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Councillor Bell?
So, through the chair, just for clarification, so Alton, or Councillor Toss, I'll get all this right in. So it was mainly, one of the concerns was around the transit? When they talked about, but was there others that came up, just from a history perspective, do you know?
Predates me, don't look at me.
Oh, well, yeah, you aren't that old.
Need to look at more
You're not
senior
that
councillors
senior.
for this.
Oh, you're not very senior then.
Order.
Because, I mean, 2013, I just, you know, as we're bringing it up again.
My fault.
Oh, it was you, the senior?
No, well, guilty. This was raised in 2012 and 2013, but I think that's 10 years ago. So just checking my arithmetic. Councillor Shepherd?
I think it notes in the report that the business community was not in favor of that. Is that true? Okay. I don't remember the details, but the point is it's 10 years later and maybe there's a lot of different things that have changed. So what I've heard certainly, and it was raised over Christmas quite vigorously, we need to one-way Cowrie. That was the view. I asked that because I don't think we got the submission from the Downtown Business Association, a lot of great initiatives that we're proposing. I think they're going to come before council, and I didn't think this was one of them. And I might be wrong, but anyway, thanks.
Okay, great. Anything? Okay. You've got something else? Great.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for whoever our liaison to the SDBA happens to be at this time to take this to them, to take it to one of their board meetings. You know, their AGM is coming up here next month. Just, you know, for referral sort of comment.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they still have no interest in even having this conversation. But
Good. Great. Okay, motion to receive this, and we'll move on for now. All in favor? Carried. All right, council, that brings us to the end of our committee of the whole agenda. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor